Mr. Secretary, what does warrior culture mean to you? Jasmine Crockett asked the question the way she asked every question, like she already knew the answer and was giving you one chance to get it right. No theater, no grandstanding, just a woman with a dollar store folder and a pen behind her ear sitting in hearing room 118 of the Rayburn building on live television, under oath, asking the Secretary of Defense to explain his own brand. Pete Hegseth leaned into his microphone. He was good at this. Princeton debate training, 8 years on Fox News, a combat deployment to Iraq. He had a voice built for these moments, half drill sergeant, half Sunday preacher, the kind of voice that made you feel like America was under attack and he was the only one who knew it. Warrior culture is what keeps this country safe, he said. It's discipline. It's honor. It's the willingness to lead from the front. It's protecting the people who can't protect themselves. And it's accountability, real accountability, not the kind you get from committees and cable news, but the kind you learn when your life and the lives of the men and women beside you depend on getting it right. He looked directly at the cameras, not at Crockett, at the cameras. That's what I've brought to the Department of War. That's what this president asked me to restore. And that's what we are doing every single day. A few Republican members on the dais nodded. Hegseth's attorney, seated behind him, uncapped a pen. Crockett was writing on her folder. On the folder itself, in the margin, same as always. She let the room settle completely before she looked up. Discipline, she read back. Honor, leading from the front, protecting the defenseless, accountability. She capped her pen. Those are your words, Mr. Secretary. Under oath. I'd like to hold you to them. I stand by every word. Good. Crockett nodded. Let's start with discipline. Mr. Secretary, I want to read from a sworn affidavit submitted to the Senate Armed Services Committee by your former sister-in-law, Danielle Hegseth. This was signed under penalty of perjury. Hegseth's jaw tightened. He knew what was coming. Crockett pulled a page from her folder. She didn't rush. Congressional hearings are marathons, not sprints. And the people who win them are the ones who understand that silence is more dangerous than volume. The affidavit states that you regularly became so drunk that you passed out, threw up, and had to be carried out of family events and public settings. It states that while drunk, you shouted, and I'm quoting, sexually and racially offensive statements. She looked up. It states that during a National Guard drill weekend, your brother had to carry you out of a Minneapolis strip club because you were too intoxicated to walk. In your military uniform, Mr. Secretary, which, as you know, is a violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Hegseth's voice was tight and practiced. Congresswoman, these are recycled allegations from a politically motivated family member who, it's a sworn affidavit, Mr. Secretary, under penalty of perjury. She signed her name. She provided it to the FBI as part of your background investigation. There is nothing anonymous about it. Hegseth opened his mouth. Crockett didn't wait. The affidavit also describes your second wife, Samantha. It states that Samantha had an escape plan, a safe word she could text to family members when she feared for her safety. A code word that meant, I need help. Come get me. Crockett paused. Your wife had a safe word, Mr. Secretary. Not for the bedroom, for the house. Because she was afraid of you. The hearing room shifted. Not a gasp. Congressional hearing rooms don't gasp. But the sound of 60 journalists stopping their typing at the same time makes its own kind of noise. The affidavit states that Samantha once hid in her closet because she feared for her personal safety. It states that she texted the safe word at least once, activating the escape plan. She pulled another detail from the folder. There's also a report from a New Yorker, a former colleague at Concerned Veterans for America, the veterans nonprofit you ran, filed a complaint against you after an incident at a bar during a work event. You and an associate were reportedly chanting, in what witnesses described as a drunk and violent manner, and I want to make sure I have this exactly right. She looked down. Kill all Muslims. Kill all Muslims. She let that sit. You were running a veterans organization, at a work event, chanting kill all Muslims while intoxicated. And now you oversee a military in which Muslim Americans serve, Muslim Americans who have deployed to combat zones, who have been wounded, who have died defending the country you now lead. She looked at him. Do they know what their Secretary of Defense was chanting at a bar? Do they feel safe under your warrior culture? Hegseth's voice was hard. I categorically deny. A complaint was filed, Mr. Secretary. It's in the record, and it aligns with the sworn affidavit that describes you shouting sexually and racially offensive statements while intoxicated at multiple events. This isn't one person's grudge. This is a pattern documented across multiple sources, multiple years, multiple witnesses. Hegseth opened his mouth. Crockett didn't wait. But let's go back to Monterey, October 2017. She pulled another sheet from her folder, a conference for the California Federation of Republican Women. You were the keynote speaker. A woman at that conference, identified in the police report as Jane Doe, told police that you took her phone, blocked the door of your hotel room with your body, and sexually assaulted her. She told the investigating officer that she remembered saying no, a lot. Hegseth's attorney leaned forward and whispered something. Hegseth shook his head slightly. I was falsely accused, Hegseth said. The police investigated. No charges were filed. I was fully. You paid her $50,000. Silence. You paid her $50,000, Mr. Secretary. You told Senator Warren during your confirmation that it was a nuisance settlement. $50,000 is a lot of nuisance. She tilted her head. In your experience, how many innocent people pay $50,000 to make false accusations disappear? I settled to protect my career at Fox News from a meritless, so your career at Fox News was worth $50,000 of silence, and now that career has been converted into the Secretary of Defense position. So the question isn't just about what happened in that hotel room. The question is, if a woman's accusation could have ended your Fox News career, and that career is the only reason you're sitting in that chair today, what exactly did $50,000 buy? Hegseth stared at her. You settled because you were afraid of what would happen if the story became public. And then during your confirmation hearing, you sat in front of the United States Senate and said you were falsely accused. You told them you were fully cleared. The police report does not say you were cleared, Mr. Secretary. It says the district attorney declined to prosecute because there wasn't proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That's not the same thing as cleared. You know that. You went to Princeton. She paused. Let the room breathe. And speaking of discipline, let me talk about how you treat warriors who actually have it. Crockett turned a page. Senator Mark Kelly, Navy captain, combat pilot, 39 combat missions, test pilot, NASA astronaut. He flew the space shuttle twice, Mr. Secretary. The last time was commanding Endeavour's final mission, a man who strapped himself to 7 million pounds of thrust and flew into orbit for this country. His wife, Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, was shot in the head at a constituent event, and he stood by her through years of recovery without ever seeking sympathy or leverage. She let that portrait settle. In January, Senator Kelly and several colleagues released a video reminding service members that they are not required to follow illegal orders. That's not radical. That's Article 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Every recruit learns this in basic training. It's fundamental to the chain of command. She paused. Your response was to initiate a formal 45-day process to strip Senator Kelly of his military rank and reduce his retirement pay. You issued a formal censure letter to be placed in his permanent military file. You called his statement seditious, a Navy captain, an astronaut, a man who earned every star on his uniform in combat and in space, for reciting military law. She looked at Hegseth. Senator Kelly said something in response that I want to read. Pete Hegseth wants to send a message to every single retired service member that if they say something he or Donald Trump doesn't like, they will come after them the same way. She set the page down. You were carried out of a strip club in your military uniform during a drill weekend. You chanted "Kill all Muslims" at a work event while intoxicated. And you were going to lecture Mark Kelly, who flew 39 combat missions and 2 shuttle missions, about military honor? Somewhere in the back of the hearing room, a woman in a Navy lapel pin exhaled through her teeth. It was the loudest sound in the room. Let's talk about leading from the front, Mr. Secretary. Let's talk about signal. Hegseth straightened in his chair. He'd been expecting this one. His legal team had prepared 3 versions of the same answer, calibrated for different levels of hostility. He reached for the middle one. I'm glad to address this directly. On March 15, 2025, you were updated by a senior military official on planned strikes against Houthi targets in Yemen. Within minutes, Mr. Secretary, you entered the details of that operation into a Signal group chat. The details included the types of aircraft being deployed, the launch times, and the strike times. She held up a page. The Pentagon's own Inspector General found that these details closely mirrored a classified email sent by the commander of U.S. Central Command 15 hours earlier. That email was marked secret//no-fawn, not releasable to foreign nationals. And you put it in a group chat on Signal, an app that is not part of the Pentagon's secure communications network, an app that anyone with a phone can download. Hegseth's voice was careful. The information I shared was not classified at the time. Mr. Secretary, the Inspector General's report found that you violated Department of Defense Instruction 8170.01. It found that your actions posed, and I'm quoting, potential risks to U.S. pilots and aircraft, jeopardizing the mission. Your own Inspector General, not CNN, not MSNBC, your Inspector General. And the report also found no actual harm was, that American pilots weren't killed is not a defense of the actions that could have gotten them killed. Nobody died is not the same as I did nothing wrong. You understand the difference. Hegseth's jaw worked. He understood the difference. He also understood that admitting it on camera would be a disaster. Crockett continued. But that wasn't the only signal chat, was it? In April, the New York Times reported, and NPR confirmed, that you used your personal cell phone to share the same classified strike information in a second signal chat. This one included your wife, Jennifer, your brother, and your personal attorney. She let that sink in. Your wife, your brother, your lawyer, not the Joint Chiefs, not the National Security Council, your family and your attorney. You shared active military strike plans, aircraft, launch times, targets with your wife on a personal phone while American pilots were flying into hostile airspace. Hegseth's voice rose slightly. Those were informal, unclassified coordinations for media coordinations that included launch times and strike times. Media coordinations that your Inspector General said could have endangered U.S. pilots. She shook her head. That's not media coordination, Mr. Secretary. That's texting your wife classified information because you wanted her to know what you were doing. And that's not leading from the front. That's gossiping from the Situation Room. She pulled one more page from her folder. This one she held carefully, like it was fragile. I want to read you something. These are your words, Mr. Secretary, from 2016. You were on Fox News discussing Hillary Clinton's email server. Hegseth went very still. You said, the people we rely on to do dangerous and difficult things for us rely on one thing from us, that we will not be reckless with the dangerous things they're doing for us. That's the national security implications of a private server that's unsecured. She set the page down. You said that about Hillary Clinton, an email server, and you were right. It was reckless. But when you share classified strike plans on Signal with your wife, your brother, your attorney, and accidentally a journalist from The Atlantic, you call it total exoneration. She looked at him. Help me understand the difference, Mr. Secretary, because the only difference I can see is the party. When Hillary Clinton was reckless with classified information, you wanted her locked up. When you were reckless with classified information, you called yourself exonerated. Same behavior, different rules. And the pilots whose lives were at risk, they don't care about the party. They just want to come home. She turned a page. And I should note for the record that you were confirmed to this position by a vote of 51 to 50. The Vice President had to cast the tie-breaking vote. 3 Republicans voted against you. That is the thinnest confirmation for a Secretary of Defense in modern history. You didn't get this job because the Senate believed in you. You got this job because one more person voted yes than no, and that one person was the Vice President. She looked at him. So when you sit there and claim total exoneration, when you tell the American people that sharing classified strike plans with your wife on a personal phone is fine, I want you to understand what's at stake. You don't have a mandate. You have a margin. And that margin was purchased with loyalty, not confidence. Hegseth's attorney was writing furiously. Hegseth himself was staring at a point on the desk about 6 inches in front of his microphone. He didn't respond. The chairman looked at the clock. The gentlewoman from Texas has, I'm within my time, Mr. Chairman. Crockett didn't look up. Mr. Secretary, let's talk about September 2nd. Hegseth shifted in his chair. His attorney placed a hand on his arm, a subtle, practiced gesture that meant careful. Before I get to the specific incident, Crockett said, I want to acknowledge something. You served in combat. You know what it's like to operate under rules of engagement. You know that every soldier, every sailor, every Marine, and airman operates within a framework of laws. The Uniform Code of Military Justice, the Geneva Conventions, the Pentagon's own law of war manual. These aren't bureaucratic obstacles. They're what separate a military from a militia. They're what make us America. She paused. I say that because what I'm about to describe challenges the very foundation of that framework. And I want you to understand that I'm not asking these questions to score political points. I'm asking because there are service members watching this hearing right now who need to know whether the orders they're following are lawful. That's not politics. That's life and death. She turned to a new section of her folder. September 2nd, 2025. The Caribbean Sea. The room changed. You could feel it the way barometric pressure changes before a storm. The reporters in the gallery who had been checking their phones put them down. The staffers behind the dais stopped whispering. Everyone knew what September 2nd meant. September 2nd, 2025. The Caribbean Sea. A boat allegedly carrying drugs from Venezuela. 11 people on board. Crockett's voice was different now, quieter, flatter, the voice of someone reading from a medical report. The United States military, under your authority, struck that boat with a missile. It disabled the vessel. It killed most of the people on board, but 2 men survived. They were in the water, Mr. Secretary, clinging to the burning wreckage of their boat. She paused. They were not shooting at anyone. They were not a threat to any American. They were drowning. Hegseth's hands were flat on the table in front of him. These individuals were narco-terrorists affiliated with designated foreign terrorist. A second strike was ordered, Mr. Secretary. While those 2 men were in the water clinging to debris, a second strike was carried out and those 2 men were killed. The hearing room was absolutely silent. Not the polite silence of a committee hearing. The silence of a room full of people who are all thinking the same thing and none of them want to be the first to say it. The Washington Post reported that you gave a spoken directive before the operation, a verbal order to, and I'm quoting, kill everybody. You denied this. You called the reporting fabricated, inflammatory, and derogatory. Then the White House confirmed that the second strike did in fact occur. Then you said during a cabinet meeting that you authorized and watched the initial strike, but, in these are your words, you didn't stick around for the second one. She let the phrase hang in the air. Didn't stick around. 2 men in the water drowning. And you didn't stick around. Hegseth shifted. The operational tempo of these missions requires that, Mr. Secretary, the Pentagon's own law of war manual defines shipwrecked persons as people in need of assistance and care who must refrain from any hostile act. It prohibits killing them. The Geneva Convention includes what's called a no-quarter provision. It prohibits conducting hostilities on the basis that there shall be no survivors. Former military JAG officers, men and women who served under 6 administrations, Republican and Democrat, issued a public statement calling this strike war crimes, murder, or both. She didn't raise her voice. She lowered it. Your own Southcom commander, Admiral Hulley, offered to resign because he questioned the legality of these operations. He was removed from his post a year into his tenure. Officers within the Pentagon's Office of General Counsel raised concerns about the legality. Multiple current and former military lawyers told CNN the strikes do not appear lawful. The United Kingdom, our closest ally, stopped sharing intelligence with the United States because they believe these operations violate international law. She pulled another page. And it wasn't just that one boat, Mr. Secretary. Since September, the United States military has carried out more than 22 strikes on boats in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific. At least 87 people have been killed. The Trump administration calls them narco-terrorists, but the Associated Press reported that many of those killed were local laborists and fishermen, ordinary people trying to make money, not cartel members. The family of one Colombian man killed in a September 15th strike says he was a fisherman. An Ecuadorian sister of a survivor says her brother had no involvement with drug trafficking. She looked up. Have you identified every person killed in these strikes, Mr. Secretary? Do you know their names? Have you confirmed that each of the 87 dead was in fact a member of a designated terrorist organization? Or did you just fire missiles at boats and trust that the people on them deserve to die? Hegseth's voice was sharp. Intelligence confirmed that every vessel. Then why did the UK stop sharing intelligence with us, our closest ally, the Five Eyes partner we've shared secrets with for 80 years? They stopped, Mr. Secretary, because they don't believe you. They looked at the same operations you call lawful and they said, we don't want our fingerprints on this. She paused. You also rebranded the Pentagon, Mr. Secretary. You renamed it the Department of War, not of Defense, of War. You kicked out the established press corps and replaced them with mega-lined outlets. You fired officers who questioned the legality of your operations. You tried to strip a senator's military rank for reciting the law. She set the page down. And then there was the meme. Hegseth blinked. After the boat strikes became controversial, after reports of survivors being killed, after questions about war crimes, you posted an AI-generated image on social media. It was a cartoon of Franklin the Turtle, a children's book character, Mr. Secretary, a character that 4-year-olds read about at bedtime. And you used that image to mock your critics and celebrate the strikes. She looked at him and for the first time in the hearing, something that wasn't clinical precision flickered across her face. It might have been disgust. You used a children's cartoon to celebrate operations that killed human beings in the ocean. Parents read Franklin the Turtle to their children at night. And you turned that character into a meme about killing people. Is that warrior culture, Mr. Secretary? Is that what honor looks like? Hegseth opened his mouth and for a moment nothing came out. The Congresswoman is deliberately mischaracterizing. I'm reading your own social media post, Mr. Secretary. It's still up. Anyone watching can look at it right now. She turned a page. You told me at the beginning of this hearing that warrior culture means protecting the defenseless. Those 2 men in the water on September 2nd were defenseless. They were clinging to wreckage. They were drowning and you killed them. She let the silence do its work. 5 seconds. 10. In a congressional hearing room, 10 seconds of silence feels like an hour. It feels like the building itself is holding its breath. And then you made a meme about it with a cartoon turtle. The woman in the navy pin in the back row had her hand over her mouth. The Republican senator who had looked away earlier was now looking at the ceiling. Crockett turned to a new page. Her voice shifted, not louder, but sharper, more personal. You also told me that warrior culture means supporting warriors. All warriors. So let me ask you about the 200,000 women currently serving in the United States military. She looked at Hegseth. On the Sean Ryan podcast 1 week before your nomination, you said, and I'm quoting, "I'm straight up just saying we should not have women in combat roles. Not we should revisit standards, not we should study the data. Straight up. No women." In your book, The War on Warriors, you wrote that women have made the military effeminate. Effeminate. That's the word you chose. She looked at the committee members on the dais. There are 200,000 women serving in the United States military right now, combat medics who have treated wounds under fire, fighter pilots who have flown missions over hostile territory, intelligence officers who have provided the targeting information that keeps missions safe, Marines who died in Fallujah, soldiers who lost limbs in Afghanistan, women who left their families and deployed to war zones and did everything that was asked of them and more. She turned back to Hegseth. And the man who leads them, the man who was carried out of a strip club in his uniform, who chanted "Kill all Muslims" at a bar, who texted classified information to his wife on a personal phone, that man wrote in a book that these women made the military effeminate. She let the word hang there. Effeminate. Let it bump against the image of women in body armor, women in cockpits, women in combat hospitals, with their hands inside someone's chest trying to keep them alive. You know what I think is effeminate, Mr. Secretary? Hiding behind your military service every time someone asks you a hard question. Blaming disgruntled employees instead of taking responsibility. Calling every criticism a smear campaign instead of answering it. That's not warrior behavior. That's not even adult behavior. She paused. You threatened to strip Mark Kelly's rank, a man who went to space for his country. You demeaned the women who serve in combat. You shared classified information on a text message. And you ordered the killing of survivors in the water, and then joked about it on the internet with a cartoon turtle. That's not warrior culture, Mr. Secretary. That's a man who watched too many war movies and confused the performance with the service. Hegseth had been holding it in. You could see it, the way the tendons in his neck had tightened over the last 20 minutes, the way his hands had gone from flat on the table to gripping its edge, the way his eyes had stopped looking at Crockett and started looking through her. Now it came out. This is a disgrace. His voice was loud, too loud for a hearing room, pitched for a Fox News panel, for a rally, for the kind of room where volume wins. This is a partisan, politically motivated attack on a combat veteran who has served this country in uniform in 2 war zones. I have carried a rifle. I have dodged IEDs. I have held the line when it mattered. And I will not sit here and be lectured about warrior culture by someone who has never worn the uniform. He pointed at Crockett. His hand was shaking, not from fear, from anger. You talk about these strikes like they're some kind of crime. They are saving American lives. Every one of those boats was carrying poison headed for our communities. Every person on those boats was affiliated with a designated terrorist organization. The Biden administration let millions of pounds of drugs flood into this country while they wrung their hands about process and lawyers. We are actually doing something. We are killing the people who are killing Americans. He leaned forward, jabbing his finger at the air. Don't you want to talk about the UK? The UK has been soft on terrorism for decades. You want to talk about the JAGs? Those are the same bureaucratic lawyers who have been handcuffing our warfighters with rules of engagement that get Americans killed. I didn't come to the Pentagon to ask permission from lawyers. I came to win. He turned to the cameras. His voice found its rhythm, the Fox News cadence, smooth and righteous. And let me be clear about something. The men and women of the United States military believe in what we are doing. The rank and file, the warfighters, not the bureaucrats, not the lawyers, not the DEI consultants. They support this secretary because I actually care about them. I've been in their boots. I've stood where they stand. And I will not apologize for bringing warrior culture back to a department that had lost its way. He sat back, breathing hard. His face was flushed, the color of a man who has been holding something in for an hour and has finally let it out. And the release feels good, even if the room isn't applauding. A few Republican staffers behind the dais exchanged looks, not quite approving, not quite alarmed, something in between. Crockett waited. She waited the way she always waited, through the anger, through the applause lines, through the silence that followed. She waited until the last echo of his voice had been absorbed by the carpet and the curtains and the wood paneling of the hearing room. Then she spoke. Mr. Secretary, there's something I noticed about what you just said. You mentioned the warfighters. You said they support you, but your own Southcom commander nearly resigned because he questioned whether your orders were legal. Officers in the Pentagon's Office of General Counsel, your lawyers, not mine, raised concerns. Service members who questioned the strikes were reassigned or fired. And Senator Kelly, a combat veteran with 39 missions, was threatened with having his rank stripped for quoting the law. She tilted her head. So when you say the warfighters support me, what you actually mean is the ones who still have jobs agree with me. The ones who disagreed are gone. The Republican senator who had been looking at the ceiling was now looking directly at Hegseth. Crockett continued, Mr. Secretary, I have never questioned your military service. Not once in this hearing. Not once in my career. You served in Iraq and Afghanistan. You wore the uniform. You earned the right to call yourself a veteran, and I honor that. I honor every single person who has raised their hand and sworn to defend this country. Her voice was calm, not cold calm. The way a surgeon's hands are calm. But wearing the uniform does not give you immunity from accountability. It gives you more responsibility, not less. And the people who understand that best are the men and women in uniform right now, the ones who follow the rules you break, who protect the secrets you text your wife, who serve alongside the women you say don't belong. She paused. Let the room settle. And I want to say something about the way you just spoke to this committee. You raised your voice. You jabbed your finger. You called this hearing a disgrace. You attacked the press, the lawyers, the allies, anyone who questioned you. That's what you do, Mr. Secretary. That's what you've always done. When someone asks you a hard question, you don't answer it. You attack the person who asked it. You learned that on Fox News and you brought it to the Pentagon, and it worked for a while because volume can sound like strength when nobody's pushing back. She looked at him. But I'm pushing back, and all the volume in the world doesn't change the fact that you haven't answered a single question I've asked today. Not one. I asked about the affidavit. You called it a smear. I asked about the settlement. You called it a nuisance. I asked about Signal. You called yourself exonerated. I asked about the boat strikes. You called it saving lives. You've called the press fake news, the lawyers bureaucrats, the UK soft on terrorism. Everyone is wrong except you. She shook her head slowly. You have a word for everything except I was wrong. And a man who cannot say those 3 words has no business leading 3 million people. She picked up her folder. You said warrior culture means discipline. Your own family testified under oath that you were carried out of events too drunk to stand. That you were drunk in uniform at a strip club during a drill weekend. That you chanted kill all Muslims at a veterans event while intoxicated. That your wife had to hide in a closet and text a safe word because she was afraid of you. She turned a page. You said warrior culture means honor. You paid $50,000 to settle a sexual assault allegation and then sat in front of the United States Senate and said you were falsely accused. A woman told police she remembered saying no a lot and you called it a nuisance settlement. $50,000 of nuisance. Another page. You said warrior culture means leading from the front. You shared classified strike plans, aircraft types, launch times, targets, on your personal phone, on an unsecured app, with your wife, your brother, and your lawyer while American pilots were flying into hostile airspace. Your own Inspector General said you endangered those pilots and you called it total exoneration. In 2016, you said Hillary Clinton was reckless with classified information. In 2025, you did the same thing, worse, because pilots were in the air, and you called it leadership. Another page. You said warrior culture means protecting the defenseless. You authorized operations that have killed at least 87 people in the Caribbean, many of them unconfirmed as cartel members. On September 2nd, 2 men who survived your initial strike, 2 men in the water clinging to wreckage, drowning, were killed in a second strike. Former JAG officers called it war crimes. Our closest allies stopped sharing intelligence with us. Your own commanders questioned the legality and were removed. And you made a cartoon turtle meme about it. She closed the folder. So I have one more question for you, Mr. Secretary. Yes or no? Do you believe that killing 2 survivors clinging to a burning boat in the open ocean was lawful? Hegseth's attorney was leaning forward, one hand raised slightly, as if to intercept the question before it landed, but it had already landed. These operations were conducted within the legal framework established by, yes or no, Mr. Secretary. The Department of War operates under clear authority provided by the President's designation of the former JAG officers who served under 6 administrations, Republican and Democrat, called it war crimes, murder, or both. The United Kingdom stopped sharing intelligence with us. Your own Southcom commander nearly resigned over it. Senator Angus King called it stone-cold murder. Was it lawful? Yes or no? Silence. 4 seconds. 5. 6. In a hearing room, under oath, on live television, 6 seconds of silence from the Secretary of Defense is a confession without words. You can't say yes, Crockett said quietly, because you know what it would mean. And you can't say no because of who's watching. She didn't look toward the ceiling. She didn't glance at the cameras. She didn't need to. Everyone in that room understood exactly who she meant. The man in the White House. The man who had nominated Pete Hegseth. The man whose approval was the only thing standing between the Secretary of Defense and the unemployment line. You called yourself a warrior, Mr. Secretary. But warriors have a code. They don't kill the drowning. They don't share secrets on text messages. They don't threaten astronauts and combat pilots for telling the truth. They don't demean the women who serve beside them. And they don't use cartoon turtles to celebrate death. She set the folder down, tapped it once, the same gesture, the same folder, the same pen behind her ear. You're not a warrior, Mr. Secretary. You're a Fox News host who got a promotion. And the people who are actually warriors, the pilots whose missions you endangered, the women you told don't belong, the officers who raised concerns and got fired for it, the lawyers who said this is illegal and were ignored, they deserve better than you. She leaned back. I yield my time. The chairman cleared his throat. The secretary may respond if he wishes. Hegseth's legal counsel was whispering urgently. Hegseth was staring at the table. The briefing binder in front of him was open to a page of talking points about Caribbean operations, force authorization frameworks, designated terrorist organization designations, international law citations, all of it carefully prepared, none of it useful now. He leaned into the microphone. I serve at the pleasure of the President of the United States. I am proud of the work this department is doing to keep Americans safe, and I look forward to continuing that work. 3 sentences. The Secretary of Defense, the man who ran the largest military on Earth, who oversaw 3 million employees, who had talked for 15 uninterrupted minutes on Fox News the previous week about how the liberal media was trying to destroy him, had 3 sentences. The chairman thanked both parties. The hearing continued with other members, but the cameras were already tracking to the hallway where producers were cutting clips and reporters were filing stories from their phones. In the hallway afterward, Hegseth walked past the press scrum without stopping. A reporter from NBC shouted, Mr. Secretary, was the September 2nd strike lawful? Another from The Atlantic, Mr. Secretary, do you regret the Franklin the Turtle? Post. Hegseth kept walking. His security detail formed a wedge around him, moving through the marble corridor of the Rayburn building like a formation breaking through hostile terrain, which, in a way, it was. Crockett was still in the hearing room talking to a staffer about scheduling. She had her folder under her arm and her pen behind her ear, and she looked like a woman who had just finished a workday that happened to be televised. In an office in the Hart Senate building, Mark Kelly was watching C-SPAN with the sound on. His chief of staff stood in the doorway waiting for instructions. Kelly didn't give any. He just watched the replay of a woman from Dallas saying the words he'd been thinking for 11 months. In a Pentagon office on the earring, a female Marine colonel in her service alphas was watching the same clip on her phone. She watched it twice. Then she set the phone face down on her desk and sat very still for a long time. The clips were everywhere before Hegseth's SUV cleared the Capitol campus. Your second wife needed a safe word to feel safe in her own home. Is that warrior culture? When Hillary Clinton used a private server, you called it reckless. When you texted classified strike plans to your wife, you called it leadership. 2 men in the water drowning. And you didn't stick around. And the one that would become the headline, the t-shirt, the thing that people said when they wanted to say everything in 9 words, you're a Fox News host who got a promotion. By 6 p.m., a soldier at Fort Liberty was watching the clip on his phone in the chow hall. He watched the part about the boat strike twice, then set his phone face down and stared at his tray. The man next to him asked what he was watching. Nothing, he said. Committee hearing. He didn't say which one. At Camp Pendleton, a female lance corporal who had just been told she might lose her combat MOS in the ongoing review was watching the same clip in her barracks. She watched Crockett say the word effeminate, and she watched Hegseth not respond, and she said a word under her breath that would have gotten her written up if a sergeant had heard it. At Naval Station Norfolk, a chief petty officer forwarded the Fox News host who got a promotion clip to a group chat with 11 other chiefs. Nobody typed a response. The clip just sat there. 11 people looking at it. Nobody willing to be the first to say what they were all thinking, because the Secretary of Defense had just shown them what happens to people who say what they think. That was the part the clips didn't capture, the silence. Not the silence of the hearing room, which was dramatic and made for television, but the silence of a million people in uniform watching the Secretary of Defense fail to answer a yes or no question and understanding in that 6-second void that the man who commanded them could not tell the truth without losing his job and could not lie without losing everything else. The Pentagon released a statement at 4:47 p.m. calling the hearing a politically motivated spectacle designed to undermine the president's national security agenda. Hegseth's podcast that week would be titled, They Can't Break Us. Fox News would run 4 segments with the Chiron Dems target warrior SDEF. A Republican congressman from Texas would call Crockett's questioning disrespectful to every veteran who ever served. The White House press secretary would say the president stands firmly behind Secretary Hegseth and his warrior vision for the Department of War. None of it landed. Not because the defenses were weak. They were the same defenses that had worked before. The same machinery that had turned every scandal into a culture war, every accusation into a badge of honor. The machine was well-oiled. It had survived the confirmation hearings. It had survived Signalgate. It had survived the boat strikes. But this time, the machine had a problem. The machine needed outrage to function. And what Crockett had delivered wasn't outrage. It was evidence. Dates, names, numbers, sworn affidavits, his own words from 2016 played back to him like a recording in a courtroom. The machine could fight anger. It couldn't fight a woman reading a police report in the same voice you'd use to read a grocery list. Because somewhere on Independence Avenue, in a black SUV with tinted windows and a small American flag on the antenna, a man in a suit was sitting very still while his phone buzzed with notifications he wouldn't open. He'd been a soldier once, a real one. He'd carried an M4 through Samara and slept in the dust and earned 2 Bronze Stars and the right to call himself a combat veteran. That part was true. Nobody, not Crockett, not the Democrats, not the press, could take that from him. He'd stood on the wall. He'd heard the bullets. He knew what it meant to serve. But somewhere between Iraq and the Fox News green room, between the battlefield and the broadcast, between the man who had served and the man who had performed, something had broken. And he'd spent years filling the break with volume, with tattoos and book deals and podcast rants and the kind of righteous anger that plays well on cable television but dissolves on contact with a sworn affidavit and a woman with a folder. He'd filled it with the word warrior. He'd said it so many times it had become a kind of armor, warrior culture, warrior ethos, warrior spirit. He tattooed it on his body in ink that was supposed to be permanent. He tattooed Deus Vult on his bicep, God wills it, the battle cry of the First Crusade, which had also been chanted at Charlottesville and carried on flags through the Capitol on January 6th. He tattooed the Jerusalem cross on his chest. And when the National Guard flagged him as a potential insider threat and pulled him from Biden's inauguration, he told the story as if he were the victim, as if the symbol were the problem and not the man wearing it. He'd built a career on those symbols, a brand, a persona that was larger and louder and more certain than the man underneath. And the persona had worked. It had worked on Fox News where volume was currency. It had worked in the confirmation hearing where 51 votes were enough. It had worked in the Pentagon where the people who disagreed were fired and the people who remained knew better than to say so. But the woman from Dallas hadn't attacked the persona. She'd done something worse. She'd ignored it. She'd looked past the tattoos and the combat deployments and the Fox News highlights. And she'd asked simple questions that required simple answers. And the answers, the real ones, the ones he couldn't give on camera, were all the same. Did your wife hide in a closet? Yes. Did you pay $50,000? Yes. Did you chant kill all Muslims? Yes. Did you share classified information on Signal? Yes. Were 2 survivors killed in the water? Yes. Was it lawful? That was the one he couldn't answer. And in the silence where the answer should have been, the persona had cracked, not dramatically, not visibly, but the way a load-bearing wall cracks invisibly, deep in the structure, in a place you can't see until the whole thing comes down. The SUV turned onto the 14th Street Bridge. The Potomac was gray beneath it, wide and flat and indifferent. The same river that George Washington had crossed, that Lincoln had looked at from the White House windows, that every Secretary of Defense since James Forrestal had crossed on their way to work. Forrestal had jumped from the 16th floor of Bethesda Naval Hospital in 1949, broken by the weight of the job. The river didn't care. The river never cared. It just kept flowing, carrying whatever was thrown into it toward the sea. The Pentagon was ahead of him. 5 sides, 5 floors, 5 rings of offices where 3 million people did the work of national defense. Most of them had gone home for the day, but the lights in the earring were still on. They were always on. The building didn't care who sat in the secretary's office. It had outlasted. Men who built the atomic bomb and men who lost Vietnam and men who lied about weapons of mass destruction. It would outlast Pete Hegseth. The SUV pulled into the Pentagon's secure entrance. The driver opened the door. Hegseth stepped out and straightened his tie and walked toward the building with the measured steps of a man who knows he is being watched by security cameras. A junior officer at the entrance held the door. He said, "Good evening, Mr. Secretary." His face was professionally blank. Hegseth walked past him without responding. The hallway was long and fluorescent and empty. His shoes made sharp sounds on the linoleum. The Pentagon's floors are not marble, not carpet, just government-issue linoleum that squeaks when you walk too fast. He walked to his office. He closed the door. He sat in the chair that Robert McNamara had sat in, that Donald Rumsfeld had sat in, that James Mattis had sat in, men who, whatever else you said about them, had run things, had managed the machine, had understood that the job was not a performance, but a burden, and that the building would judge you not by your volume, but by your decisions. He opened his phone. The first notification was from his wife. The second was from Fox News. The third was from the White House. He read none of them. On his desk was a framed photograph of himself in Iraq, young and dusty and holding an M4, squinting into a sun that was trying to blind him. The man in that photograph had been a soldier, had been real, had earned every ounce of the respect that the man in this office was spending like borrowed money. Pete Hegseth, Princeton 2003, Fox News 2014, Secretary of Defense 2025, confirmed 51-50 with a tiebreaker from the Vice President, sat in the most powerful military office on Earth and stared at a photograph of someone he used to be. The earring lights hummed. The building waited. It had outlasted better men. What happens when warrior culture is a brand instead of a code? What happens when the man who leads the military can't say lawful or unlawful about his own orders? What happens when the people who question him are fired and the people who obey him are afraid and the only voice left in the room is the one on the podcast? Somewhere in Dallas, Jasmine Crockett was on a late flight home. She had her dollar store folder in her carry-on and her pen behind her ear, and she was reading something on her phone that had nothing to do with Pete Hegseth. She'd asked her questions. She'd read the evidence. The rest wasn't up to her. The rest was up to the building. And the building, 5 sides, 5 floors, 6.5 million square feet of linoleum and fluorescent light and classified information, and the largest military on the planet. The building was still waiting for someone to answer the question that the Secretary of Defense could not. Was it lawful? Yes or no? The building was patient. It had been waiting since 1943. It could wait a little longer.